that her father worked in the mine.
Yes, no, not in the mine.
On top, he was hoisting engineer.
Yes, that's right.
Mm-hmm.
That's to bring them up and down on them.
Uh-huh.
Yes, as you know, we had the deepest mine in the state. And it was 1,040 deep, I believe, as I remember. And they had that tragedy in Louis where about 50 miners were killed.
I remember reading about that.
Just at Christmas time.
Mm-hmm. And then after the mine, Assumption began to become a smaller community.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes, you see, when my grandparents came here, it was, this part of town was Tequila. You knew that.
I knew that something was called
Tequila. It was, and it's too bad that they didn't leave it Tequila because it was Tequila. And then Mr. Maya came from Louisiana, and he was from a parish called the Assumption Parish, and he wanted the south end of town named Assumption. So that part of town was called Assumption, and this part was Tequila. So then finally it was all combined.
Now, that was the group that came and named that part Assumption. That was like a French Catholic settlement, wasn't it?
Yes, they were all French in that part of town. That's where the first school was. My aunt was the first teacher here. But of course she lived in this part of town, across from the church, where Wendell Price, that was their home. And different house, of course, but that's where they lived. And she was the first teacher. Mm-hmm. And the Loverings, Glenn, let's see, it would be Glenn Loverings. I don't know. It must be Glenn's great grandfather and grandmother, I guess, were teachers in that first school. And that was on Illinois Street. And they called it the Murray House. And I've heard my mother say that the Murrays had pigs, and they let the pigs run in the house, and they had school upstairs. Now that was the first school.
Now that first school, do you know, was that like
it was
eighth grade?
Oh, eighth grade. I don't think so. She wouldn't have been that old when. Now I don't know if it had first, second, third, and fourth.
Probably just reading and writing and
probably
arithmetic. For those early grades.
Mm-hmm. But of course, I don't know about that.
Where did you start school?
Where did the old East school?
What do you remember about school when you were really young?
Oh, well, one thing I remember, of course I had a teacher, Miss Cronin, that was just adorable. Mother said I'd stop and I'd see her on the street and say, oh, there was my dear, sweet Miss Cronin. And she was George Charity's mother's sister. She was George's aunt. And we were having, they used to have quilting societies and in the church. So they would all meet and quilt. And they were having a lunch here in this house. And my cousin and I came home from school and we had lunch, but we had to wait. And it made us late for school. So we started on the run to school, and just about the time we got to the door, the bell rang, and we wouldn't go in. And we came home, cried, because we were late for school. That's one silly thing I remember.
When you were in school, did they do the, like, standing up and reciting and learning
Yes.
poetry.
Yes, yes.
That kind of
Mhm,
thing.
mhm.
Do
Yes.
you remember how many children? Was it a small group of children, or were there quite a few?
Well, no, there were quite a bit many in the class.
Did most children go to school?
Yes. Mhm.
When did Assumption have a high school?
A high school?
Mm-hmm.
Well, we had the high school in that same building.
Oh, did you?
Let's see, now I went the first, second, third, and fourth, I think, over here. And then went to the West School for the sixth, seventh, eighth, and ninth, I guess, as I remember. And then the high school over.
Do you remember enjoying going to school?
Do I remember?
Did you like going to
Oh,
school?
yes, yes, I think we all
Uh-huh.
enjoyed that.
What did, when you got to be, say, a teenage girl,
Oh,
what was
music.
music was the thing you were interested
Carried away with it.
in? Where did you take lessons?
Well, first to Milton. I went to the conservatory before it was built, started. And then, of course, it was finished that same year, as I remember. And so I went back and forth on the train. And no cars.
Did you go like once a week?
Twice.
Twice a week?
Because there were classes too, and I had classes history.
Oh, yeah, it's Dothan, I reckon.
Oh, was that Dothan? She's bringing me cucumbers.
Oh.
And then, after that, I went to Chicago and studied voice and organ. We had our organ.
Where in Chicago?
Where? The school of Chicago School of Music, I believe it was. Oh dear, I have to look in my bench in
How
Chicago.
long did you study music?
How long?
Uh-huh.
A long time. I don't know, Sonny.
You lived up there?
Well, I had two uncles living up there, and so would Dotha come in?
She left you some cucumbers in there on the counter.
Oh, for goodness, I can't recall anything right at the
In the
moment.
book we were reading, they were talking about like farmers having superstitions about either when they planted things.
Oh, now, Sonny, I do that. That isn't super.
Tell me about that.
Oh, you know, I used to, do you remember Mr. Shem?
Oh, yes.
Well, he worked here for over 45 years, and he would always plant everything in the garden according to the moon signs. So I started doing the same thing, and I would order a moon book and just wouldn't think of planting, and I still do that. And I've read, now that is not superstition, so no.
Well, from the looks of your garden, it works.
But I still have a moon book that I go by, and Lloyd Fouts has been working here, you know, until this year, and he just didn't approve of that. I guess he didn't believe in moon signs. I think he thinks that's superstition. But it really works. He'd plant radishes in the wrong time of the moon, and they'd just go to the top. We wouldn't have any radishes. So we plant in the right time of the moon. We always have radishes.
No.
But I do that.
And your family's been here for so long. Are there like holiday traditions that you remember as a child that your family had?
Yes, I do. Of course, my mother and father were married. They were the first couple married in our church. And they always had the minister. They lived, my grandfather lived across the street, so they were always having the minister over for dinner. And about that, but I don't know. We were quite young, of course. But
Do you have a dinner like that every Sunday, or?
well, I don't think they did that on Sunday. That's one thing. They didn't cook on Sunday.
Oh, really?
Oh,
Oh, I
never.
see.
No, they did all their cooking on Saturday and never did a thing. And another thing,
Oh, that's fun.
you probably heard them say that we had, my grandparents had what they called a melodeon, and it's a small instrument organ. And they would carry that over, Mother said, they would carry that over to the church every Sunday morning. And they had evening services too. And then the Sunday night, they carried it back across the street. And so that was something she would have still had. I would have that. But she had a sister-in-law in Chicago that thought it was such a lovely antique, she just begged her to let her have it, and Mother had it created and sent it to Chicago. Too bad.
Yeah. Did you keep horses here?
Horses?
Uh-huh.
Oh, yes, that was one of my father's hobbies.
I was thinking that I had heard that. Were they a particular kind?
Well, racehorses, yes. Yes, he used to enter a horse in the races, and of course that was just north of us, you know, at Mer Johnson. That was the racetrack.
Oh, is that
that
right?
was when they first had Vance Elmore married my mother's niece, and he and Mr. Vance and see, Mr. McClure had one of the first cars. Vance and Mr. Conley, I believe it was, went to Chicago and bought 2 Studebakers. I'm sure they were Studebakers. And then came out here to take us for a ride. And he took us up to the racetrack and drove around the racetrack. And then came back and drove around town and unloaded us. And Mother said, where is the gas tank? Oh, and the driver was Vance, and he said, well, you were sitting over the gas tank. And she said, oh, my goodness, I wish I had known that. I wouldn't have gone out for a ride. Oh, no, that was the first car. Those 2 were the first cars in town.
Oh, were they? They were the first ones here. 2 Studebakers.
Yes, I'm sure I'm right about being Studebakers, because he was the agent then for Studebakers.
What year would that have been? About what time was that?
When?
Yeah, about what year?
Oh, I couldn't have been. Let's see. I just don't think I can tell you what year that would have been. I might be able to look it up. No, I don't think I can look it up either. I remember too, he was, but I remember the first night that we had electricity, and they were having races at Mert Johnson, and my folks from Chicago came down on the midnight train, and Mother had lights in every room in the house, and the city had asked if they could install a bar of lights up in our yard. You see, at that time, we didn't have Route 51, so our yard extended over on the other side of this pavement, so it was a big yard. So they had a long bar of electric lights just for display and to advertise, I suppose. And that was a big night, believe me.
Oh, I'm sure.
First time we had electricity.
I bet everybody was really excited.
Oh, so excited. And $1 a month. They paid $1 a month for electricity. That was, no, that, I couldn't have been very old at that time. But I don't know how old, but I remember it.
And then you remember the first telephones and
Oh, yes, Your father and I were talking about that one time. He said, we've seen a lot of changes. Of course, he isn't nearly as old as I am, but he could remember that. Of course, I don't know about the first telephones, but we had two companies here. We had the Mutual, I believe, telephone, and what was the other one called? I don't know, my father had both of them in the store, but Mr. I.L. Long was the head of the other company, superintendent or whatever they called him.
The thing that I was thinking about asking you when I was coming over, we were going up, well, our family went up in the woods there northwest of our house, and there's a cemetery up there where a lot of my husband's family is buried. And we noticed, like, on the tombstone, there were lots, young children.
Young children.
Like, from a family. Do you remember people, like, getting very sick from, like, smallpox and it being like an epidemic type thing in the community?
My, I don't, well, of course, Jim's too young, he wouldn't remember the Cushing family, but, they had, two children that had diphtheria, I believe, and they died within weeks. One died and the other had it and died in maybe 3 weeks later or something like that. And, yes, that happened a lot.
Do you remember the doctor here?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Oh, yes. Dr. Holt was our doctor. And that, of course, was yeah, I forgotten who they had for you. Dr. Holt was one, but they had someone else. Dr. Rivard sang in our choir. Mother said, now you knew Dr. Rivard, didn't you?
No, didn't know him.
Oh, no, well, he was a Catholic, Sonny, and very fine family, and he was interested in, I believe Mother said, the minister's daughter, so he came to our church and sang in our choir.
To meet the minister's
I
daughter.
suppose. For a while, then of course he later was.
Do you remember celebrating birthdays and things like
Oh,
that?
yes. I still have an account of my 6th birthday. Mother had quite a large group out here. And she had, 3 or 4 older women helping. And it was in the yard. And it was all in the paper. Oh, couldn't have been more than 10 years ago. I was so surprised to see that account in the paper. Maybe it's been 15 years ago. I don't know that it was in the paper. But I have it someplace. I cut it out.
About your 6th birthday party.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah, that was really something.
But, were Saturday nights a big night in those days?
Yes, it
Yeah.
was.
Did the stores all stay open?
Yes,
A lot of
the
people
stores
came to
were
town.
all open.
And people just went
Mm-hmm.
into
We went
town.
downtown on Saturday night. Yes, I did.
The looks of the downtown area, there were a lot more businesses.
Oh, there were.
Than there
It was
are
quite a
now.
flourishing town. Yes.
That was like, I suppose because of the mines. And
Yes.
more people lived here.
And they didn't have cars. They couldn't travel around like they do now a lot of times. So that made it.
When your family went somewhere, like before cars, did you have like a carriage and horse?
Yes.
And then did you ride horseback too?
Well, I always wanted to ride a horseback, but I guess I was just a little timid. I tried it several times, but it was a little frightening.
But you
So,
mostly-
but I drove a horse, a pretty frisky horse, and my father always had horses, so yeah, I know.
Now, how old are you now? How old are you now?
How,
How old are you now?
how old am I?
Uh-huh.
Don't you know how old I am? I'll be 93 next month.
93.
I would,
Can't believe it.
that would be my wish, to be 93 like that.
Yeah.
Oh, no. Oh, you have a long, long way to go, and I, oh,
You know,
So you were born in what, 1892?
92.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's amazing.
you have seen just the world.
TV,
Mhm.
and that was something I just couldn't believe. We were, did you know Don Pitzer, my nephew?
I have heard of him, but I never met him.
Well, Don and his first wife and I went to the fair in New York, and he said, I want you to come in this room and see this setup. He said, it's something that we'll soon be looking at all over the entire country. And I said, where do you want us? He said, in the room next door. So we went in that room, and they had television. They had these pictures, and I said, oh, Don, we'll never see anything like that. We couldn't possibly. Well, I said, they just had this all set up in the room next door. He said, no. He said, you'll soon be seeing pictures just like this. Well, of course, it wasn't long.
What year would that have been? Sometime in the 30s or 40s?
Well, that was the year of the New York Fair.
Mm.
Whenever that was, let's see. Oh, dear. That's the year that your husband died.
39,
39.
I think so.
I think it was.
And her brother, Stanley, asked him, wanted me to come out here. He said, Layla needs someone to help take care of her mother. He said, try it. If you don't like it, go ahead, stay.
You must have liked it.
Still here. So she's been here ever since. But, of course, as I said, we had cars first, and then telephones, and electricity, and planes.
Airplane.
We used to have to take the train to Decatur, of course, before we had cars, and my mother and I would go out for to shop or something, and we'd come home on that midnight train and walk out here. Didn't think about being afraid in those days.
You couldn't do it now.
No, wouldn't think the neighbors, it won't bother the neighbors, so.
How many years have you gone to Florida?
Over 60.
Is that right? 60 years you've gone to Florida to
Do
live.
you go to the same place?
Well, you mean the same apartment?
Well, no, the same.
Oh, yes, St. Petersburg, yes. See, I had a cousin living in St. Petersburg, and so we just continued. She's 4 days older than I, so we've been very close, but she's gone now. She passed away. So, but that's home.
Your grandfather started the Presbyterian Church. He was Barrett.
It was organized in his home.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the members were in that family, in my grandfather's family. Of course, he and his wife, and I don't know how many children. See, Aunt Jane, see, Mother was too young. She was only 3 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And, see, Aunt Jane, see, Ron, Emma, Dale. And then some of the Travises were in the family. And I've forgotten how many members there were. No, I did know how many. when they organized.
Now you say they lived where Wendell Price lived?
Mm-hmm. Right across where Wendell Price.
Yeah. That'd be right across the street there
Mhm.
south.
Mm-hmm.
So your mother was the youngest
Mm-hmm.
in her family.
Lawson.
I knew they were related to you in some way, but I didn't.
Of course, there are no Clausens left around here now of that branch at all.
Do you remember your grandmother, Bud?
Oh, Mason?
Ken,
Yeah.
Mrs. Ken Bug?
Oh, yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah. See,
I thought you.
She
I
died-
even knew her.
Oh, did you?
yeah, she died in 65. Which
3 days before our first son was born.
Oh, really?
Mhm.
Well, we were always close friends.
Oh, yeah. I
She
stayed,
was an interesting lady.
spent a lot of nights in at their house, you know, especially going to school. A lot of times I'd stay overnight if I had a basketball game or something, you know, rather than my parents coming to get me, I'd stay overnight.
Uh-huh.
I
Well,
spent a lot of time.
she was an organizer.
Yeah.
She'd get things all organized for our big chicken fries. They used to have chicken fries, you know, at church. And, they would come from miles to a chicken fry. Well, your grandmother would get everything organized and tell everybody just what to do. Then she'd go leave and have her hair done. And then come back later. But she really had things well organized. She knew how to do it.
Well, I have to tell you about the first time I met Jim's grandmother. Because Jim was the apple of her eye. And
Good.
so when I met her, she said, well, dear, you know Jim can look a long time. And I didn't know quite how to take that.
Oh, wasn't that nice? She meant that for a real compliment.
She thought he-
Oh, I can understand that.
Here's is that Zadok? Zadok?
Zeta. Wait a minute, let's see, what did they call him? They called him Zadok, I believe. That was Lanham, wasn't it? Zadok Lanham, was it?
Bosworth.
Bosworth, oh, well, then there was also a Zadok Lanham. And
Here's Holly and Linus and Tracy and Melville and Charlotte and Rebecca. And they all spell the Rebecca with
that,
the K-A-H at the end.
oh, yes,
That would be like the biblical.
oh, yeah.
And Patrick. Patrick people.
Yeah, that's my DAR ancestor, I think.
That's interesting.
Ebenezer, no, it's Ebenezer Gray, isn't it? Yeah, that's Ebenezer Gray, I guess I remember it then.
Sergeant Ebenezer Gray. So you have many interesting things.
Oh, well, it's lived a long time, so.
I was interested in what you were talking about on Sunday. You said that your grandparents, they didn't cook anything on Sunday. They cooked everything on Saturday.
Everything.
So they really observed the Sabbath. I mean, they just wouldn't do anything then, huh?
Oh, my word, I can remember when my mother didn't want my father to buy a Sunday paper. She just thought it was terrible to buy anything on Sunday.
Was that
And
right?
when they did some remodeling out here. My father said, the photographer said he was coming out to take a picture of the whole area here. And he came on Sunday afternoon, and I said, oh, Mother, he's taking a picture. I thought it was terrible to take a picture on Sunday. So one Sunday, I never took a picture on Sunday, and I always had a Kodak. One Sunday, I saw them taking pictures over at where Dota lives now, the Myers house, and her grandfather was a minister, Mr. Long, as you may have heard, and he was taking a picture. And I thought, well, I guess if Mr. Long can take pictures on Sunday, it's all right to take them. So from that time on, I didn't hesitate. I wanted to take a picture on Sunday. I told Osa about that. So,
What did people do on Sunday then?
oh, I don't know.
It was a pretty quiet day then.
Yes, sometimes so. My father would, of course, we just had horses in those days. From a week was a long trip, but I'd beg him to drive to Mowicqua, and we had a long drive to Mowicqua, and we'd call on the Day family, and that's Lois Lovering's mother's family, and the Snell